In what capacity do you believe change to a direct democracy in the manner that each individual votes on representatives and issues are weighed equally would affect the political process? In other words, would anything change or would policies still be driven by the wealthy constituents?
We'll start with Mike.
Well, I'm more unclear about the voting.
No, sorry.
Well, but then you couched it into representative. I thought direct democracy was when individuals voted on issues. You had the entire polity vote.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so you're not voting for representatives. So, all right. Actually, I don't see the advantages to direct democracy. To my mind, direct democracy amounts to doing public opinion polls.
So, as it relates to this issue of having a direct democracy where the populace makes decisions about all manner of governance, I think that there might be a place for certainly at the local level, advisory questions or things that are used by local governing bodies to do just what Mike said, basically take a public opinion poll. I would say that, I was a small town guy from Sitka, right, trying to make it a big old world. But I'll tell you, managing and putting together a $25 million budget that ensures that we have the right amount of periodicals versus the right amount of books on the library shelf, that ensures that we're up to standard and code as it relates to whether or not we have a fire hydrant 2 feet or 3 feet away from the street. I think that the business of governance does start to become maybe cumbersome and nuanced. Now, I'm not saying that you need to have a permanent political class that makes all your decisions for you, but I do think that there's a lot of decision making that goes on that I think that a direct democracy could be cumbersome.
Carol?
I think that citizens are extremely smart. I think that citizens are capable. I think that citizens as community members may know better what their community and their neighborhood needs, more so than a politician who is divorced from the situation. I think that you all in this audience and everybody else out there in this town is highly capable and can make decisions. And that doesn't mean polling. I think polling is fairly terrible. But you know what? I think we could get together some citizens. I think we could get together students in a room to talk about tuition. And I think we can get citizens in a room to talk. We can get students in a room to talk together about tuition and what we can do about it, about whether it's a problem, how do we solve, how do we budget. Because you know what? I think that you're capable. I think that having students make those sorts of decisions, for example, is probably a better way of making decisions about your tuition dollars and your student fee dollars, for example, than sorry, Pat Gamble, you're not in the room, right? Than having Pat Gamble go out and make a decision unilaterally about how and how much you're going to pay. I think you're smart, and I think you can do this. I think you have the cognitive ability to go in and weigh decisions to say, well, what programs do we need? What programs might not we need? What might my tuition dollars or my student fee dollars go for? Well, you know what? There's a group of people here who say that we need that shuttle bus going to Anchorage tomorrow because the hockey game and the Governor's Cup is incredibly important. Well, okay, if that's important, then what do we have to live without? And can we live without that as a student body? I think that you are capable of making that decision. That's not polling. That's students, that's citizens making a decision for their community. And I think that's a better form of decision making than having, for example, President Gamble, Brian Rogers, that mustache back here, than having them make a decision for you. For heaven's sakes. At least then there's a chance that if you make that decision, then you are being more likely to support whatever tuition raises happen. You are more likely to support whatever student fee raises happen or wherever your student fee dollars will go to than when Brian Gamble, whoever the hell these people are saying, well, here's how we're going to spend your dollars and here's how your dollars are going to be spent. We're more likely to support those initiatives and those ideas than when they come from an edict on high. That's not polling. That's citizens coming together to support the idea of social capital in a way that makes a lot more sense and might lead better democracy than what we've got now.
All right, so I guess, in my mind, direct democracy cannot really exist unless we have economic democracy. And by that I mean, just like was mentioned, we don't necessarily need a managerial, political, bureaucratic class running our lives. We don't need managers and bosses running our companies. We can directly, democratically come together to work and figure out what needs to be produced, how to produce it, how to deal with wages. Why do we need to have managers being paid more money than us to dictate and direct us as workers? I mean, that makes no logical sense to me. So to me, economic democracy and direct democracy need to be required. Without basic needs met, without the ability to meet and discuss because of poverty, because of lack of food, lack of resources, we're not allowed to flourish as individuals. We're not allowed to be involved and engaged. Like, we need to have basic needs met, we need to be participatory, we need to be involved. But I think those two need to be connected. Otherwise, direct democracy, especially when it's, and with this, I think direct democracy needs to be as close to consensus as we can make it, if not consensus itself. The idea of 50 plus 1 being able to coerce the other 49% to do what they want seems patently absurd to me. I mean, what gives them the authority to dictate the terms of my life when it's one person difference? Like, I just personally don't see that. So to me, I guess that, so economic justice, social democracy, and an attempt towards consensus-based is really, to me, I think the only way to really do it correctly and fairly.
So what we're doing is we're carefully rewording the question of who does what to whom, right? Does the mob get to decide what's done? Do the white people get to lynch the black people? They have a majority. They won the referendum vote. These are political questions. They're organized around how is legitimate violence directed in our society, right? Are we going to buy it? So that buys into the premise of legitimate violence. What kind of society are we going to have when the people in that society base their entire social interaction system on violence? Probably a violent society. There are a lot of other questions here that we have this economics and philosophical discussion group, and I would really encourage people to check it out. We had a thing, asymmetry in pay. That's because of time preference and risk averseness. But there's a lot of answers to a lot of these questions that are being thrown out, and we just don't have time to discuss them in this time. So I have this group. If you go to if you Google Fairbanks Campaign for Liberty, it's open to everybody in the community. And we take hours and hours every other Friday to discuss all this stuff in depth instead of trying to fit it into 3 minutes. So if anyone's interested in that, just Google Fairbanks Campaign for Liberty and you can find our site where we have these discussions.
I watched Congress and the Supreme Court fall prey to rationalizations that allow exceptions to the rule and steer fairly clear principles left or right or down or up. And the bottom line, in my opinion, is that greed, power, lust, ignorance, self-servingness, etc. are human features. They may be more prevalent in narcissists and sociopaths, and I could go into MMPI testing where it relates to certain features in people who tend to seek positions of power. Those folks scare me enough. I don't remember whose quote it is, I'm paraphrasing, but when the public finds itself able to vote itself into the coffers, it's when democracy will fail. And I think that our libertarian person at the end, I'm not being impersonal, it's that anxiety and memory loss go hand in hand. I'm not even sure I trust myself anymore. I know I don't trust my neighbors. I certainly don't trust Congress. I think that's why we had a Bill of Rights and the whole concept of unalienable rights. recognize was that mob rule gets really messy once you start rationalizing why some people should be able to do something to someone else. I watch our various representatives run now and hand out trinkets from the coffers, which really amount to breadcrumbs of, look what I gave you last session, and this is their way of buying votes. And I think, man, what happens if we turn that loose on the whole, I don't know. I'm not a big proponent of mob rule. I think that with proper parameters, limited context, some means by which to guarantee that individual liberty is not offended, betrayed, or violated by direct democracy, then cool, let's try it. I mean, right now we have what's supposed to be the guardians of that liberty, and they seem to find ways, reasons, and means by which to compromise it with each passing session. And they have a military and we don't. So I don't know. I initially am distrusting of direct democracy, but then I'm distrusting of humanity.
Opportunity for us to try to answer one of these questions for you guys. I think the simple answer is yes. I think even in a direct democracy, you cannot eliminate the influence of money in politics. I think the more important issue, and it's something that I personally have struggled with, and this whole, I'll call it a journey. It's been a formational journey for me personally. But I want to echo something that Dirk said, and it's this idea of unalienable natural rights. Well, we're under the assumption in this country that we were given those rights in that document that was ratified in 1787. But the truth is, that was just a recognition of those founders, and it was a brilliant recognition that those were rights that cannot be taken away just by birth. We are fortunate enough to enjoy those rights. It was a recognition by the founders that from the dawn of humanity, those existed. They're innate. They are innate in being a human. Around the 1800s, there were some pretty smart guys that wrote it down on pieces of paper. Authors like Hobbes and Locke. So that gave us a starting point, right? It's another step in the evolution. And then we get to that document that was written in 1789. And to further that, I think that our democratic system that was designed has helped. I mean, I think it's helped further our rights. I do not think it's an end point. And this is the thought that I personally struggle with, is what's next? Because the system designed as it is not fair. It's not equal. And inherently, I know it, and I've known that this is not right. So I don't have an answer where to go from this step. Some more educated panel members, and maybe they've been thinking about it longer than I have. They may have answers. I don't. I just know that we cannot be in a system where a majority gets to decide what's best for a minority. So our next question is, are we as a species able to live without corruption? There are examples, Rome, Egypt, etc. Can we govern ourselves appropriately in these current conditions? We'll start with Sean.
I generally don't like answers regarding human nature. I don't really think there's much to gain from it often, because it's usually just people have their opinions and don't get much further. It's like having the pro-life, pro-choice argument in my mind. Human nature arguments seem very similar. I don't know if humans could live without corruption. Probably not to some degree, but humans have existed in social dynamics for tens of thousands of years and have done so without large-scale states. They've done so in communal settings. They've had potlatches and relatively egalitarian forms of social interaction. There are still many indigenous communities throughout the world that still have societies that are very low violence, relatively voluntary, that have gift economies or exchange economies, that have conceptions of mutual aid. I mean, is there corruption? Probably to some degree, but I do know that people can live in a more caring, free, and supportive community than we currently have. I don't think that's really all that hard to accomplish, actually. I mean, there are examples of people living with, I think, better virtues and ideals than we currently have. I don't know if it could ever be done without corruption, though. I'm not even sure what that would necessarily mean.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I often get called a Looney Tunes utopian, and I like to turn that one around and say, well, how well is the state working for you guys? So, the argument for the state is, well, people will always be corrupt. Therefore, we need a state to keep the bad people from doing bad things to good people. Well, who inevitably rises to the top of states? Right? Anybody big fan of Hitler out there? Mao, Lenin, Stalin, George W. Bush? Okay, so honest people who don't lie and don't steal and don't cheat are at a massive disadvantage in any political system. Because, and this is just inherent in politics, especially elected politics, your goal is to appeal to the maximum number of people. Right? So if you have a bell curve distribution, you want to appeal to the middle. So what does that mean? That means you have to sell out, or you have to lie to the maximum number of people. And so, of course, corrupt people are going to rise to the top of political systems. All political systems. This gets back to the problem. Politics, right? We're not dealing with, we're allowing people to make decisions outside of their own life, outside of their own domain, over what other people do. And so I think corruption is sort of built into that. And so let's accept the premise that people are going to respond to incentives. This is the basis of economics. Corruption is a response to an incentive. But it's not a market incentive. It's not a mutual exchange, both parties expect to benefit incentive. It's I'm going to get elected so that I can point guns at people and steal from them. I'm going to get elected so I can draft people's kids and send them off to war, so I'll reap the rewards of that. These are not voluntary things. These are political problems, right? Corruption breeds these big, or politics breeds these large corruption problems. If you have a bad used car salesman, everybody in the town hears about it and stops buying cars from him. If you have a bad politician, we re-elect him. So the question of corruption, I mean, can you change the nature of people? What is the nature of people? I don't know. But when you assign people an asymmetry of power, when you give someone a legitimate use of force that's unchecked, right? You say, okay, you can draft our children, you can point guns at us because you have the right suit and the right badge, and you take that away from other people, that's where the problem comes from. That's when you make corruption systemic, right? You have the use of force with no appeal. And this is inherent to the state and all political systems.
You're up there.
No. I've kind of lost what the question was.
Okay.
Rome, Egypt, corruption.
Corruption, no. Well, I'm not so disinclined to talk about human behavior. After 50-some odd years, I've observed that people misbehave. And in politics, misbehaving involves corruption. Going to the anarchist direction, eliminating government corruption, well, eliminating government would quite do that. If we want to live under a system of government, though, or if we're stuck in a system of government, we would like to set up a system where we minimize the degree of corruption. And if you look at the history of American politics, to a certain extent, that's been the process throughout. We're never going to get rid of corruption in politics or in
just about anything else involving money. The question is, how can we minimize if we want to live under a governmental system, how can we minimize the corruption? Now, in ancient Athens, my understanding is if a politician, was elected and did things that the majority did not like, they would be banished. So that's a nice mechanism. When the politicians misbehave, you send them off to the hinterland. We don't have that mechanism. I'm not sure we can have that mechanism. But Dirk and I we were talking yesterday. There are mechanisms we could try to minimize corruption in politics, but that's about the best we can do is try. It's always going to be there, unfortunately.
I think I stated earlier that, I think that it would be naive to believe that humanity is perfectible. We are all human beings. We all have failings. We all fall short of the mark or the standard or the glory forever and ever. Amen. Okay. That is part of who we are as human beings. I can tell you, I can attest, I don't want to start church in here, but I'll testify, okay, that as a former elected leaders, I have seen good people come into the room, hear testimony, difficult, compelling testimony from both sides of an issue. I've watched them process, I've watched them toil through a public process, come to a conclusion, come to a decision. Decisions I had agreed with and decisions that I had disagreed with. Only to have the other side accuse the governing body or the members that are in the majority, the minority, of being in the bag, of being corrupt, of being persuaded by something other than what they believe to be the right thing for the right reasons. I would also, I have to counter, somebody in the room has to counter this call for anarchy. Policy, procedure, ordinance, statute, administrative code, public law is not a legitimate weapon of force, it's a legitimate check on force. We have due process in this country. If you get, if you're an employee here and you call out the chancellor, you have tenure and you are protected because you have freedom of speech. This democracy is a majority rule, but we also have minority rights. And yet we're not perfect. We need to continue to work to be a more perfect union. But to suggest that the total absence of policy, procedure, ordinance, statute, public law somehow would create a system anything less than two wolves and a sheep deciding on what's for dinner is naive. Quite frankly, is naive. What that suggests is I'm bigger than you, I win. And you know what? There's no cop. There's no law, and there's no rule that's going to stop me from winning.
I'm not entirely sure what it means to be non-corrupt or what that would look like. Do I, as an individual, as a citizen, go into any discussion or place where I would share a political opinion with my opinion and my ideas? Absolutely. Does that make me corrupt? I'm not sure. And if it does, I would beg to differ on what your definition of corruption would be. But I think a good way to check corruption, I think corruption exists. And it is easy for corruption and for politicians and citizens to be corrupt when we don't have to be accountable to each other. When citizens have to make no connection, they don't have to be accountable to their neighbors. Easy to be corrupt. If we can be accountable, if we value social capital, if we value our community and our citizens and the connections and the social bonds that we have, I would make an argument that we might see less corruption. You're less likely to see people act out in their own self-interest against the majority.
I just have a very brief answer to that question. It's not really an answer. So it's kind of getting at human nature and people inherently corrupt. Well, me personally, I don't think people are inherently bad. I don't think they're inherently good. I think they're inherently people. And as Scott suggests, we're imperfect. And the only way that I can really answer this question is by using my philosophy as an example. I do my best to follow the golden rule. Right? And I think it's the most just way to live your life. You know, I do unto others as I would have done unto myself. And that's my answer to that question.